Hi, I'm Sylvia, and welcome to Re-Envision Health, where we explore the intersection of health, technology, and work. Today, we'll be having a discussion with Jessie Wusthoff. Jessie is the Director of People and Culture for Clover Health. She is a passionate diversity and inclusion advocate with over 10 years of experience in program management and talent development strategies. Her focus is in developing equitable design and creating safe spaces for conversation in the workplace. Welcome, Jessie. I'm glad we're getting to talk today.
I'm excited to be here. Thank you.
So tell us, what do we need to know about your work? Tell us about your work.
So right now, as the head of people and culture at a part Medicare, part tech company, I'm excited to have a unique opportunity to be able to really talk about disability in the workplace internally and in terms of our members, given who our customers are. But when it comes to my work overall, I think the main things people need to know is it's their work too. And that's true with a lot of diversity, equality, inclusion, equity. It's everyone's work. It's not just the work of the people who have it in their title. And that's the number one thing I really try to help people understand about this work is it's not my work, it's our work. I also think that it's both very simple and very complex, and it's going to be intimidating sometimes, but that doesn't mean it's not still pretty straightforward where the work needs to start. And it's really more about the attitudes than disabilities. And you could say that about a lot of groups, a lot of oppressed groups, underrepresented groups. It's not anything about them, it's about everyone else. So those are things I like people to just really philosophically understand about my work. And I have a lot of pride being able to do that work in a company and in a way where it is top of mind for people to think about people with disabilities as our members and as the people who we are too.
So it seems like for your company, that also applies to the customers as well as the employees that they're working with.
Mm-hmm. It definitely does. There's a lot of things that I would love to see more companies doing internally with their employee population. But at the end of the day, we're interacting with a lot of people with disabilities every day. Mm-hmm. Or at least a good number of our teams are, right? And we're designing processes and products that need to serve a diverse population, including one that is not below average when it comes to representation around disability.
So what are the kind of things that you guys do, or what are the kind of ways that you get people to understand that it's not just your work, it's also their work?
Yeah, I mean, I think that goes to all of programming, all lessons, all learning, all combos. Sometimes some people just need that reminder, and sometimes people just need to have it explicitly said for them. A lot of people, and I think a lot of people in majority groups, and that what that means does vary. We're actually over half of my company is women. And so I don't want to make explicit assumptions about who's going to be in the majority, but there are some common groups. When people are in the majority, especially, white men who are often in the majority in a lot of corporate environments, they don't know their place, quote unquote. I don't know my role. I don't know my place. I heard that more 2 years ago than I hear now. I think there's been a lot more vocalization of here's what you can do like lately. So I think I've seen some comfort, or I've had some comfort in the progress I've seen there. But by telling someone, and a leader especially, having them understand this isn't bonus work, this is weighted in your review, for example, on the same weight as your ability to be strategic, because this is part of you being strategic. And really just calling it out from the beginning is it's my number one priority, quite frankly, is the integration. Like I said, we were talking before this conversation right now. Yeah. If I go away for 2 weeks and everything, like people are flustered and floundered, I didn't do my job very well, because what I'm trying to do is set you up to take ownership and have those combos, and including with like product development. Talk to me how you have a diverse focus group, things like that.
So in the practicality of that, is it that you would have someone with that kind of focus working in all your different areas, or just how does that practically kind of show up? Because I could think, you could have an organization where, okay, that's the intent, but how does that happen when I'm sitting at the table over here with the product people, and we're talking about our product and maybe forgetting that aspect of it?
Absolutely. So there are times where you need the specialist in there. I think the easiest one for me to identify is in engineering, in coding. It is a hard skill, like it is a technical skill. and you're either going to have someone have to go to that training to be the one like assigned to making sure that we know what we need to know and we're doing what we need to do for that technical aspect of accessibility. That's not a role that reports to me. That's a role embedded in engineering. So on that practical stance, I have seen companies, not where I work now, but I've seen companies think they know, but it gets pretty darn detailed. So that's where it's in that, like, how does that rubber hit the road? That's how, like, you need the person who has that technical expertise. In marketing, for example, they need to understand color contrast. They need to understand that the Spanish speaking population of one state is not the same culture as the Spanish speaking population of a different state. The populations of those states are very different culturally in general, and therefore you need to be doing different focus groups, right? Things like that, helping them understand. That's where the embedding and making sure they have the education. I frankly would like you to hire people with this education if you need them to hit the road running, but I also like people to grow and develop internally. So getting that build up internally. Where it's the hardest is the strategy, because if the tip of the top of the company is not looking for their executives and their VPs to do that integration, it will always be an afterthought at most. And when something's an afterthought, it is not executed as well. So for example, if you build your whole website without the accessibility from the very beginning, it's gonna be a long time before you're willing to spend the money to rebuild the whole thing again. So it's just not financially efficient to not be thinking about a lot of these things. If you do something that's not accessible, you also might get sued. I don't want that to be the reason people do something like this, but let's keep it real. It costs a lot of money to get sued. So that's, different things motivate different people. I do think that's a reality to kind of live in for me personally. But that's, practically speaking, you have to understand what are the technical skills that are so big enough, broad enough, detailed enough that you have to bring in the expertise to make sure it happens correctly. And then you need to step up as a strategic thinker, because if you're missing this, you're missing other things too.
That's a really good point. That is a really good point. Yeah. And culture is so specific. I have a friend who is a diabetes specialist, and she talks about that, just how different cultures even feel about diabetes. And I have it because of this. That's what one culture thinks, and the other culture thinks the other, and the other one's feeling embarrassed. And, those are really nuances let's say, rolling out a diabetes program. It's like, those are nuances, which populations.
Absolutely. And it's just fascinating to me what different people's brains will naturally understand is different. There's differences, and what people still will clump into one. And that's something I'm continuing to observe and learn, like what that means for the work that I'm doing.
That's an interesting thought. Yeah.
People still group disability as one entire group. And I often get really specific questions like, my friend a few years ago asked me a question about like what screen reader is best. I was like, I do not know. Like, I have a prosthetic leg. I've used some screen readers to try to test out the basics of something, things like that. But I'm like, Google will be able to help you more than I can help you for sure. And I think a lot of times people see me having a disability and they assume I'm an expert on all things disability.
Yeah.
And that's not how any group works. We talk about groups in D&I sometimes as well, but certainly as a society, we talk about groups as monoliths, and it hinders our progress dramatically.
Now, I met you first at a little conference that was really focused on disability accommodations, and particularly hidden disability, and this was a few years ago, but it really opened up my mind to how I think about disabilities, how I think about accommodations. And I think a couple of things I walked away with. One was a lot of people have hidden disabilities that we just don't know about. And it's impacting them. It's impacting their work. It's impacting their lives. But also, just because it looks like someone is really disabled doesn't mean that they need a big accommodation. I remember one woman saying that she just needed to start work a little later.
Absolutely. Yeah. And employers also worry about how expensive accommodations are. And Jan, the Job Assistance Network, has published information that they're quite affordable, quite frankly. A lot of them don't cost any money. I think the average was either $200 or $500. I apologize, I don't remember each one. Either way, if that's how much you're spending on an employee, like that's in the grand scheme of how much employees cost. It is not tons of money. So I think that is hard. And I think that's something I found myself thinking sometimes, because I don't know how much any technology costs, or at least I didn't. Now I have a lot more exposure. I don't know how much corporate licenses. Like I didn't know at the time. So for me, one of my questions, I'm going to be really honest, is I don't know how much that costs. And when your job is to think about cost, I get people getting hung up on that, but they need to do better. Like, I'm not going to judge someone for what natural questions come up when they're doing any sort of assessment, but like, you got to remember human beings, and you got to remember reality, and you got to remember to like ask, not assume, right? So I think that does come into play with invisible disabilities. I know one of the talks, the one that I led in that event that you're speaking about, really focused in on it's about the attitudes, not the individuals. And someone can have the same disability, and what they do or don't need can be quite different. And you're never going to know that. And it's not going to be comfortable for me, someone with a disability at this point in my life. It's a lot better to come and tell you what I need. But at the same time, like, you assuming is going to be much worse. so just having, giving people resources that they can easily and safely feel like they can pull from is like by far my best strategy. So that is like a centralized fund. That is someone that is not their manager being that first point of contact, that they can ask all of the vulnerable questions that they've been probably nervous to ask. Or they've asked so many times, like that they like could, it doesn't matter. Like, not everyone's going to be uncomfortable with this. So I don't want to overgeneralize there, but I will say, I think in everyone I've spoken to, the first time you have to ask for anything, whether related to the fact you have a disability or not, it's hard in a corporate environment where you're constantly being looked at, and some groups are being looked at more than others, and you have to overprove yourself, right? It creates a psychological dynamic that can be really hard. So you have to make it easy for people. You have to have the right people available to them. They have to have options so they can talk to whoever they feel safe talking to. And invisible disability, I've seen different statistics. I was actually looking this week to see what the most current numbers look like. Well over half of disabilities are invisible.
Wow.
Right. And I think one thing I've been bothered by more recently, a little bit more, is we talk about invisible versus visible as though you can only have one or the other. I have both. And I was talking to someone at a company that's interested in really doubling down on their work in disability, equity, and inclusion. And I pointed that the way they're doing it now, as someone with a visible disability, as someone with both, but like that part of me with a visible disability feels entirely excluded from the way you're managing this conversation right now. You are saying the way you have just focused on this piece of invisible, there's this really weird like competition that's being created that is comes from a place of pain and people not feeling heard and feeling like they have to scream to be heard sometimes. But is not beneficial to anyone, because at the end of the day, what your employees need is to trust you, which requires you trusting them. And it is harder when you can't see the tangible thing, especially for some people. That's very, very hard. I talk about this in the talk I do. It is so hard for people to trust what they can't see a lot of the times. Everyone's a little different, but that is not uncommon of a reality. And so I have had a boss tell me, like, you're fine. It's like, cool. I'm about to cry. I'm in so much pain. I'm actually not fine. So I'm going to smile and I'm going to go back to my desk and I'm going to get like nothing done for the next 4 hours. This is going to be awesome. Like but she was not a very trusting person in general, which I was able to like pull back and come to that for my own kind of coping of that experience. But boy, in that moment, that's not what I was thinking.
Wow. Yeah. There's intersections with people. People have
intersections with people. Even within my disability, I have a lot of privilege. It has been, someone asked me about this point blank a couple of weeks ago, and it was funny. I was kind of, it was someone who could ask me this question. It was far from a stranger. Let me put it that way. A professional that I talk to all the time about D&I work. And it's something I've been thinking about in the last year. People can only see me from the shoulders up. I have a prosthetic leg. So a lot of the times people are surprised to learn I have a prosthetic leg. When we go back into the office, it's going to be emotionally exhausting for me. It's going to be emotionally exhausting to have all the new hires and the staring and stuff like that. So there are some people who have probably not realized their life has been more like one with an invisible disability over the last year. And it's going to be a weird transition back to making things more visible again. It's going to be rough for me personally. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah. Yeah.
So this is why it's like different situations create different amounts of visibility. Is something mutable? Is it not mutable? What is the emotional cost of muting it? Things like that become very, very, very complicated, regardless of whether something's visible or not, but in different ways, whether it's visible or not. But this exclusive, you're one or the other, is just not. I'm starting to get more vocal about it because it's not helping me personally, and I think it's doing harm to a lot of people.
I do too. Yeah. Yeah, I could appreciate that, definitely. So, Jessie, what inspired you to get into this line of work?
I worked at a company a while back for both business and personal reasons. Some of the personal ones, I've slightly alluded to.
Yeah.
But I really do think if you have people with different points of view, you're going to get the better outcome. Feel free to insert study here, right? And I worked at a company at one point that I heard a lot of people stressed, basically, that we weren't as innovative as we used to be. And I wanted us as a company to succeed. And that company was really competing with the big, mega companies in the field, right, at the time. So you really needed to take advantage of your smaller size to be agile and to be, creative to survive. And I looked a little bit into why. And I had the advantage of having a little bit of visibility into some things around hiring and such. And they were hiring from 2 universities within a 3-year graduation range. And they were not universities that are known for their diversity, if you will. And so even if they had been, you were hiring people who were literally taught by the same people how to problem solve. And so that compounding reality, I think that to me was the most important thing. One of my bigger triggers is biases related to universities. I can't buy into that. So for me, I'm even if I loved these 2 universities, if they were my alma maters for 2 different degrees, one of them wasn't one of my alma maters. We're problem solving here. We're trying to be a disruptor. And that's not going to happen if everyone was trained to problem solve the exact same ways. So, that's probably enough of that. Yeah. But for me, I that just doesn't make business sense. And it was also destroying the diversity because of the lack of diversity of the universities, so on and so forth. For me personally, my disability started with a congenital issue, my visible disability, congenital issue. And I'm born without a bone and I have short bones in my left leg. So that's why I have the prosthetic. From day one, this was the thing. This has been part of my experience with my body. Yeah. I never talked about having a disability until I was at that company, actually. Wow. And I felt like I was experiencing some pretty blatant discrimination and problematic behavior. So one of the things I don't go into as deeply in any version of any talk I've done, but I do touch upon is the toll of covering cannot be underestimated. If it's not a concept that's familiar to a listener, I'd really recommend doing a little bit of research, but that kind of trying to assimilate, hide the thing that you're worried about someone thinking less of you for is real. And it is very true. People hear about code switching language, changing your physical appearance, changing things like your hair and your dress. There's a lot you can read about here. I worked for someone for 3 years. I traveled with them. And they did not know I had a prosthetic leg because, for a very specific reason, I wouldn't say because it would kind of give away a little bit about who the person was. There was a relationship there where I did not have the safety. Right. You feel like they were going to not think much, much less of me. Even then, I did not talk about having a disability. When I went to a company and I got very explicit feedback that my boss did not feel like I could do my job with my disability. That was the exact wording. I just sat there and I obviously it was a pivotal moment. I had spent decades trying to prove I was not less because of all the societal stuff, things people close to me had said. I had spent decades, and it happened anyway.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of anger in that moment of, what the heck have I been doing these last 30 years? If people are still having the thoughts, if people are still going to think of me as less capable. The accommodation I needed at the time was 4 hours a week of flexibility. I talked to an employment lawyer, and they literally were like, that's not even enough of an ask, I think, to count as an accommodation. and that's what I was being told. Like, you have at least one, like every 3 weeks, a second doctor's appointment a week. I don't see how you can do your job. 2 months earlier, I'd gotten a promotion and a significant raise above average, blah, blah, blah. So this person comes in, and that's their feedback on me. Yeah. And I think one of the more helpful things to hear, because I think this is a trap a lot of people fall into, that someone might fall into when they're talking to someone who has an accommodation need, whether related to disability, caregiving, whatever, is, well, I do this, why can't you do this?
Right.
So that boss said, well, I go to my chiropractor who's 5 minutes away and has appointments on Thursday evening. That's fantastic for you. My situation is so complex. I have been studied. I need to drive 30 minutes away to this practitioner who is so good, he doesn't have to work Thursday nights because people will take the time on their work week because he has a very different skill set than most practitioners. Yeah. So that's something I really want to call out, because it's very human. When we want to problem solve. Sometimes we want to problem solve way too quickly. Some of us do that more than others. That is not helpful. That is not helpful. That is not problem solving. That is not stepping back and being curious. Yeah. So I think that, to me, those assumptions, whether those assumptions are about like how we should be developing our technology, how we should be supporting our employees, how I can be a friend to someone, like, test your assumptions a little bit before you put them out loud. So I did eventually leave that company.
I would figure.
And I think for survival, because my childhood was physically, I was very, very lucky in a lot of ways. Physically, it was rough. I had 13 surgeries before I was out of middle school.
Wow.
And a couple of them went wrong, so like it was rough, and it's straight up coping mechanism. I'm not going to glorify it as anything else. Finding that silver lining is a survival tactic for some people. And it's one of mine. And I think I just had to find some win out of being treated so badly. Yeah. And for me, I wrote that first talk I did on disability that you heard.
Really?
I was so fed up that I was like, all right, I'm a stubborn, opinionated person. And you just did this thing. And now I'm going to go do this thing. And I'm going to shout from the rooftops, and you're not going to mute me anymore. You're going to hear me. And I've done it at lots of different companies. I've been on panels at Harvard, Stanford, talking about disability, like things like that. It's been emotionally exhausting at times. Yeah. But it's also, especially at the beginning, really freed me to be like, oh, look, and I wasn't fired. So I now talk about disability when any sort of job interviews since then. I talk about my disability, and I actually will ask a hiring manager, have you managed someone with a disability before?
That's a good question.
It's a good question. I don't want to assume they can't handle it if they hadn't, but their reaction to that question is very telling. Very telling.
That's an interesting story. And it's been freeing for you, but it's also just so helpful because it's not a big voice out there.
No, and I'm known for having a rather loud voice. So if you're going to have the cons of that, you might as well have the pros of that. So
right.
It's like I said, sometimes I take a break and focus on other things where I can, advocate for other places and simultaneously advocate. But every disability is everywhere. Yeah. It is in every single intersection of every single group. It just doesn't make sense why we're not talking about it. It's 20% of the population.
That's a takeaway right there.
20% of the population. Statistically, there's a good chance you're going to have a disability happen at some point in your life. Just keep it real.
That is true. I have found that out.
Yep.
So, I have to have a back problem. I also often tell my husband, I never thought I'd have back problems.
I never thought a lot of things. I feel like every time I go to like a general practitioner, I was like, oh, come on. Like, it's just, my list is long enough, dude. Like we're good. But the world is, that's life. That's the human anatomy is fascinating. And sometimes we wish it would do differently, but just take care of yourself.
Exactly. So from a business perspective, and we touched on that a little bit, and you talked about just having these different perspectives in business. I know a lot of times when I work with organizations, there's the good we can do, but then it's like, where are the hard numbers? Where are the numbers, sometimes where you have to take it up to the C-suite so that they actually believe that putting money or focus or time, or whatever it is, into this type of effort makes sense. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think when it comes to disability, it's a similar strategy, right? There's a lot of overlap to the strategy with any initiatives in diversity, equity, and inclusion, but the reasons for people's discomfort are a little bit different. So sometimes that comes into play. There is a debate that I do not see going away in my lifetime amongst DEI practitioners around why people should do this work. And what data are they willing to use to talk people into doing this work? You will talk to some practitioners who do not want to use "you don't want to get sued" as a legal argument because that's not what they consider the right motivation to do the work. You will talk to other practitioners who will use whatever motivation there is because they know the work has to happen and the consequences to them, it's a different kind of payoff. So for me personally, I want to respect the fact that we all are going to come with different points of view of like, what is the hard data and what is the thing you bring to that executive suite? Every human being you're going to interact with at the executive suite is going to also be different and be moved by different things. So for me, I do find myself more effective if I can find a personal connection to what I'm trying to advocate for, more so than any data could ever do. So if I know that your immediate family member has this experience, I'm going to talk to you about what we can do around that experience if it's something related to the business work we're doing. But when it comes to the data, there's a lot of data out there around retention, work output, around different disabilities. And retention is actually really strong. That is a bittersweet statistic because part of why retention is strong is because we might know that our options might be limited due to biases during the interview process. So we might stay somewhere where we're not ecstatic because we know finding a new job will be very, very hard. I want to call that out. However, I do still think there's a lot to be said on the positive end of that. I know if I feel like I'm respected as a person with a disability, I'll put up with a lot of other stuff because it's so important to me. It's like, all right, I've got too many meetings, but I can breathe about the fact that people are going to see me in shorts,
Yeah.
So I think that I don't have numbers that, but just to go back to as concrete as possible, talking about as many numbers as you can. There are numbers out there. Go to Jan. You can see some numbers there. Askjan.org has a lot of information about accommodations. Disability In, they have a lot of information or some statistics there that you can use in your arguments. But for me, I think one of the ones I've actually found more impactful is this is roughly 20% of the population. And when people think about people with disabilities, they assume something so extreme that they don't understand that working could be an option. And so I've had conversations where I talk about those decisions. It's like, no, 20% of the population is not on disability. And usually that's when someone can't work.
Yeah.
That's when they'll be on disability. There's a lot of people who are held out of the job just because of attitudes, not because of their ability to do anything.
Yeah.
I have a privilege in that I can use myself as an example. I was interviewing someone once and she said, well, sometimes they simply can't do the job. Obviously I'm sitting there I would like to veto this candidate immediately. But I asked and she said, well, obviously a paraplegic can't be a truck driver. And I sat there thinking, this feels like a very extreme example that helps me understand where your mind goes and how rigid it is and how little you understand what people can do. And so for me, looking at that data that tries to debunk myths is always going to be very important. And I think it's because we don't have a lot of convos around disability, very impactful when you can talk about that. So I'm okay, I won't argue with that specific example. However, there are other things that a person can do. And I was like, I have a prosthetic leg and I can drive a truck. It's definitely, I have to laugh so I don't cry.
I understand.
So go to those, talk about the realities of the people that you are trying to, create a voice for, and you're trying to partner with to create a space for, and use some of those statistics about how much this is. And if you don't have someone with a disability helping you with your product design, so Facebook, let's all love and hate Facebook at the same time, pros and cons. Why was Facebook ahead when it came to being a better tool for people with various disabilities? Mark Zuckerberg is colorblind. That is why they had the simple design and the simple logo. And that is why when people were one of the many get off Facebook boycotts a couple of years ago, I saw a lot of posts by people with disabilities kind of panicking. Like, this is the only social media platform I can use.
Wow.
And that to me I had very complicated feelings at the time, because I could point to lots of things they were not doing well around DEI at Facebook, but it just, because of my heart, it really hurt me to see that. And it really hurt to see, I of course, every video that comes across my feed around disability inclusion, like I'm going to watch for technology, and seeing the really cool technology they were doing, and like auto creating picture descriptions and dictations and all these things no one else was doing at the time. Like it slips under the radar. And I think that's a shame. So look, 20% of people, it won't be the full 20%, but if a lot of the population, you're trying to reach literally the whole population with your product, especially in that kind of extreme example, they gave themselves an advantage that put people in a very tough spot, a big community in a tough spot. And for some, I'm sure some people would listen and be like, that would be an easy decision. Even some people who might have been in the situation, it might have been an easy decision. For me, it just felt very hard and very complicated. I didn't feel morally comfortable either way, especially like, I don't want to just abandon a community. But also like there's some things going on. So it's hard. So I think, but without someone with it's like, I, to my knowledge, the founder of other social media companies, I have not heard anything about that. I actually still worry. I'm like, but is he colorblind? Because I hear about it so little, and I hear about their disability.
I've never heard it.
I know. Sometimes I'm like freaked out that it's like a conspiracy theory thing, but because I've never heard him say it, right? But regardless, for whatever reason, they invested the money and continue to invest in the money on making their product actually be what they say they want their product to be. And that is a tool that everyone can use.
I don't think a lot of people understand what that means, frankly.
I don't know sometimes if I understand what that means, because I don't have every disability that's ever existed, right? I've been homebound for certain periods of my life, but I haven't been, not for a decade at a time. Maybe like a year. So it's and it was, and I will say this depressingly, it was before like even Google existed. So it was what it was.
Really no connection with the outside.
Right. So it's a very, if you don't need the tool for that, if you don't benefit from that, then you're not going to understand it without doing a lot of real heavy thought. And I don't see a lot of people, in my friend group and my peer group from like my MBA program, things like that. I don't really see people stepping back and thinking about what is our full user group. They tend to start with the biggest wedge of the pie. And I think in a lot of cases, oh gosh, I forgot the phrase. In a lot of cases, if you think about one of the harder wedges to reach of your potential customers, you're going to capture all these other things. And so it's a different return on investment analysis. So in D&I, it's like if you do something that targets this intersection of these three things, you are unintentionally capturing a huge audience. So like if you're like of these three experiences, of these three, like whatever. That's sounds and feels so expensive to so many people. But if you don't really look a little bit further, you're not going to know if it's actually that much more expensive.
Like how hard is it really? You don't even know if you don't explore it. Wow. as far as barriers for people, because you've given a lot of information and a lot of ideas about how we can start incorporating this like every day in our work and website. But what do you see as the barriers? Are they more, I'm gonna ask this, are they more external or internal, do you think?
To a company or
To individuals who are listening to you today and thinking, I really want to learn more about this. I really want to be more engaged in this space.
I think it's the discomfort in having any sort of conversation for the first time. And piggybacking on that, it's the fact that because of the diversity within this word of disability, you're going to be having conversations for the first time 3 years from now, 10 years from now, because, every human being is different. And really, I think people need to think of a lot of tough conversations that way. Like I talked about the monolith group. I'm like, I'm not having the same conversation about ageism with everyone who's the same exact age. Like it doesn't really understand them as human beings, but it becomes very intimidating. And I think when I like to frame it like, if you're uncomfortable, it's because you care, and thank you for caring.
Yeah.
Now, what we shall do is get comfortable with being uncomfortable. People assume I'm never uncomfortable. I'm uncomfortable all the time, but that's how I know I'm continuing to push myself. I do this for a living. I will absolutely make mistakes. I will absolutely learn and grow. And that's what we all need to do together. And I think right now it's extremely stressful for people to make mistakes because they're really spotlighted in public ways sometimes, depending on who you are, what your role is. I think that's intimidating, and I won't really make a judgment statement on whether that's a good or bad thing, because it's a complicated thing. But it's scary and it's intimidating. So just work on your discomfort and know that you're not a bad person for being uncomfortable, but know that you're letting yourself down by being inhibited by your discomfort, and you're letting your friends down and your peers down and your potential down by just getting frozen by discomfort, because it's just so much easier said than done, and I respect how hard it is. But the thing I say is like, no one ever died from being a little uncomfortable. I like it's just gonna be a little uncomfortable. No, I'm not talking about like full on physical manifestation anxiety. I'm talking about like you're gonna be a little uncomfortable, and that's good. Because that means you're stretching yourself, and you'll get less uncomfortable, and then a little less uncomfortable, and you'll make a mistake and you'll feel more uncomfortable, and then you'll go back to feeling less uncomfortable. So just be comfortable being uncomfortable. And I think that's true, whether you have a disability or not. We're going to be uncomfortable of different parts of the different conversations. If I was about to start a new job, I'd be sick to my stomach about having the accommodation conversation all over again, but I know now how to have it at this this career stage. And one of the specific things I always recommend, as you may have known, humor, as you may have been able to tell, humor is very helpful for me. And it doesn't mean I'm not taking topics seriously. It is part of how I try to de-stress the environment, to have people relax enough to hear and to listen. And it is one of my DEI strategies. It doesn't mean it's always the right strategy, but for me, it's related to with a show called Speechless. It was, I believe, an ABC show. I think it's on Hulu still. It's called Speechless, and it was a sitcom. And there were multiple people with disabilities in that writer's room, which I knew before I researched to confirm. Because it's a family sitcom, character actors, that setup. And one of the ways I like to frame it is like the normal person is the person with the disability, like totally typical teenager. And then every other person in the family is like such a caricature that it was just kind of fun to watch, quite frankly. But it's very funny. And especially the first season talks about the things you need to understand to really engage with this work and to feel like you can start to understand the context. Things like lowering standards, things like inspiration porn, like that's a real thing. And that one really triggers me. I've been called inspirational for just having a job. And I'm like, I'd rather be retired personally. I mean, no offense to my employer, but I've got hobbies and interests that would be appealing. Rent is a thing. And it really talks about the key things that you have to understand. And I think in a really approachable way that gets you thinking while being super accessible, because you're laughing along the way at the fun parts and you're taking the serious parts seriously.
Yeah.
And I think for me, it made me as a person with disability feel more represented, feel more comfortable, I felt really empowered that I could just say, like, go to this thing. So please go watch Speechless season 1, if nothing else.
Well, this is fantastic because they have, like, there's TV, there's video that we can watch, there's stuff we can read, there's organizations. I love this. I love giving people, like, especially, and even me, you know, just being able just to share, like, just some ways for us to kind of strengthen in the area. We have a last 2 questions.
Okay.
For the podcast. But before I get there, I just want to kind of echo. Actually, a little quote that I have written up here is that vulnerability is the greatest strength of the human condition. And I have that just for the same reason. You know, it's like every day we're vulnerable, we're out there, and just to keep it in mind, it just requires vulnerability. So, Jessie, if you weren't doing what you're doing, what would you be doing? Now, you just talked about retired, but what would you be doing?
I'd be gardening and playing with my dog. No, I would probably, I used to own an art gallery, and I would love to do that again in my career. I would love to do that. We especially because all of our artists were artists that would not be able to get into the very rigid structure of the traditional art gallery. They were brought on board for the talent that they displayed, not where they had previously shown. So even in my, like, fun, happy thing, I'm like, no, you know, like it was a really fun thing. And I would definitely own a gallery again and probably volunteer at a museum.
Oh, that would be fantastic. Mm-hmm. That would be fantastic. Yep. The last question, something we'd like to leave everyone with is, what is the one thing that you suggest we can do today? I know you're giving us a lot of suggestions, but we had to just pick one thing today when we finish listening to this podcast to start being more engaged in this space. What would be your kind of go-to suggestion?
It's going to be watch Speechless.
All right.
You're going to start thinking in ways you haven't thought yet.
Excellent. Well,
I think they should start paying me commission.
Have an affiliate deal. Oh, well, thank you so much. This has been really an enlightening conversation. I'm so glad I had the opportunity to talk to you today.
Well, thank you so much. It was a pleasure. I appreciate it.
Thank you for listening today. This podcast was edited by Terrence of 1015. That's TENONEFIVE.com. Notes for this podcast, as well as any websites and links that were mentioned today, can be found at reinvisionhealth.com. And please, if you liked what you heard, be sure to share this podcast or tell a friend.